Growing up, I didn't spend a lot of time outside of the various Nintendo franchises that were getting new titles every couple of years, so there are quite a few games that I missed entirely. Even though I became a big Remedy fan as I grew up, Max Payne is one of those series of games that went largely unknown to me. Sure, I knew the name, but otherwise it was a complete mystery. After starting this channel, I knew that at some point I would be playing through these games. It was only after the Max Payne reference in Control that I decided to make this sooner rather than later. That being said, this will officially begin the start of my First Impressions series, which will focus on my thoughts, theories, and other impressions when playing a game for the first time. So here we go. As stated earlier, I was aware of Max Payne as a concept, but never really delved into it. The primary knowledge I had of the series was the brief Easter eggs within Alan Wake. It was my understanding at the time that the Alex Casey novels that Alan authored effectively followed the narrative of Max Payne. In that sense, Payne and Casey were the same person. Before that, however, the first time I heard of this character was from the trailers for the 2008 film starring Mark Wahlberg. I never went to see this film, so going into this game, I have a blank canvas to work with. In the initial panels from the comic strip, I was honestly amused to see Payne genuinely happy. A future father delighted to give up smoking for the sake of his child, refusing to work undercover to ensure the household was perfect for her. This was a welcome contrast to the cynical detective that was presented through Alan Wake. It wasn't until I heard the knock on the door and his line, "Honey, I'm home," that I knew just how quickly it was going to hell. This line was a flashback for me, echoing the sudden stop manuscript that detailed Casey lying in the snow, his final thoughts on his wife and child.
I can see them now. My wife and my baby. Honey, I'm home.
From there, we bear witness to the start of his descent from the Boy Scout he was into the man he will become. After taking control of the character, I had a bit of difficulty getting through the first section. Within the first couple of enemy encounters, my no-death run was already lost. At the time, I was surprised by how much damage Payne took and was convinced that each section had to be cleared without healing. So I took my time and learned the enemy placement before engaging in order to better my chances. It may be sad to admit, but after attempting to enter the control room and the officer was blown away, I literally ran around circles for 10 minutes trying to find out how to proceed. In my head, I needed a keycard or something to get through the door and never found one. While searching, I hit my second death, which was a little embarrassing. Trying to find my way around to the other side of the grate, I did this. Seeing how it reset me back to the beginning, I was beginning to grow a bit frustrated. It wasn't until 20 minutes of running around that I realized Payne could actually interact with the terrain. The E button opened up the entire game for me. It let me enter the control room, and more important than that, I discovered a cabinet with painkillers. Feeling like an idiot, I finished up the first section with no further issues. As usual, my frustrations with the game were less to do with the game itself, but my lack of understanding about how it functioned. When going through the subway, I noticed an ad for Aesir on the wall. Knowing Remedy's proclivity for using Nordic myth and folklore, I began wondering how the archetypal Asgardian deities would play a role in this story. The Anderson brothers and Alan Wake fashioned themselves after Odin and Thor. Even their bandmates were named Fat Bob Balder and Loki Darkin. So I began to question, in what capacity would the Aesir gods show up in this story? My other curiosities related to Payne himself and the concept of the Black Dragon. For those unfamiliar, every individual has their own internal Black Dragon. It is the feral aspect of our psyche that we keep chained and caged. I'm sure all of you listening have heard whispers from your dragon at one point or another. Anyone who has been bullied thinking of how they would exact revenge. Thoughts of how you would treat a difficult customer, or fantasies about sabotaging a competitor. We all imagine scenarios we would never carry out in real life, because if everyone released their dragon, it would be chaos. After witnessing the first couple of panels after Michelle and Rose's death, I began to wonder if the story of this game is watching Payne loosening the chain around his dragon's neck, and little by little, let its claws come out. Fresh out of Chapter 1, Payne finds himself in the middle of a robbery at the Roscoe Street Bank. Throughout the segment, we discover that the target was the corporate bonds that the Aesir Corporation had housed there. Eventually, Payne meets up with his partner, Alex Balder, who is quickly assassinated before our very eyes. As of the second chapter, I quickly realized that simple trial and error would not be enough to get me through the enemy mobs as it did in Chapter 1. Even knowing the enemy placement, the rooms began to require me to run down long hallways without the benefit of cover, just to be close enough to be effective. While the handgun option did make long-distance combat feasible, it would require me to always be on the run to avoid incoming fire. I admit my accuracy with shooters is kind of lacking, so this option led to some bad ends. For the first time, I was required to dig down and get a handle on the bullet time mechanic, which I mostly ignored in Chapter 1. After some trial, error, and my handy shotgun, I pulled off getting through with only a couple of deaths. The difficulty on this chapter, for me at least, came largely from the level design, and learning when to use long-range versus short-range weaponry effectively. I have two major observations for this chapter. First, let me preface by saying that I am no expert, or even amateur, of macroeconomics or investment banking. But I was curious about the motivation to steal bonds from Aesir. As far as I know, the only people who can redeem a corporate bond is the listed owner, so it made me question the motive of the heist. My opinion here was either the mobsters responsible for the heist had a connection to Aesir and were acting on their behalf, or it was an attempt to devalue the bond held by them. Honestly, I don't have enough information to make a formal theory, so those are my two hypotheses for now. Lastly, the death of Alex further adds to my opinion that the story is the descent from the civilized Max Payne to the Enchained one. Alex acted as the last personal relationship that gave him a tether to civilization. With that lifeline severed, Payne is left to fall even further. The major development for this chapter is the revelation that Payne will be taking the fall for Alex's death. From here on forward, the DEA and NYPD will be hunting him as a fugitive. The setting takes place in a mob-run whorehouse, and every detail further displays the depravity of the situation Payne finds himself in. Just as I was getting the hang of the combat and maintained a surplus of painkillers, a new enemy mechanic is introduced. At first I thought the junkies located within this chapter were simply there for the atmosphere, showing off the effects of the Valkyrie drug. However, in one of the bathrooms when one attacked Payne, I realized that they act like alarm mobs. That is to say that if left alone, they will mutter to themselves and ignore the player, but if startled by things like gunfire, they will be triggered and attack. The attention given to the heavy snowstorm that has assaulted the city feels more of a thematic setup rather than simply a setting detail. With mention of the Aesir, the drug named Valkyr after the Valkyries, and now a heavy snowstorm, the Norse mythology parallels are everywhere. If we are to equate this snowstorm to Fimbulvitr, that means that this game takes place in that unyielding winter that precedes Ragnarok. Whether this is foreshadowing an event in the story yet to come, or merely a metaphor for the end of Payne's personal world, I can't really say. But it is said that Fimbulvitr consists of 3 consecutive winters that conclude with the end of the world. Considering there are currently 3 Max Payne games, it makes me wonder if each symbolic winter is the plot of each game. If this is the case, what is the event at the end of this trilogy that symbolically parallels Ragnarok? With the entire city setting its sights on Payne, hunting him like a common criminal, he has nowhere left to go. His family, dead. His only friend, dead. And his city against him. The only hope for Payne to drag himself out of this hell is to get to the bottom of the Valkyr outbreak and clear his name. At this point, the only ally he has is his wits and his personal black dragon that is gaining more freedom as the chapters progress.